Thank you so much for joining us in the third of our series of diversity in tech. I think you're really going to enjoy the session that we have planned for you this evening. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is my why, and we're going to have all the panelists introduce with their why. But many of you know that the mission that I have undertaken with my new company is changing the face of IT. And there's lots of pieces to that. It means more business acumen, it means more communication, more collaboration, but most importantly, it means more diversity. As we sit here today, the numbers of diversity in tech sit at, when you look at gender diversity, about 23% of people in tech are women. When you look at racial diversity, about 8% are African American and 7% are Latinx. Those numbers are horrible. Just to put it bluntly, they're horrible. And so why we chose the topic for today of diversifying your network is because we tend to hire people that look like us. We tend to hire people that are interested in the same things as we are. And we tend to hire people that we hang out with. So diversifying our network is going to help solve these problems. And that's why Julie and I decided that this would be the topic for today's session. So Julie, you want to go to the next slide and we'll look at the agenda for today, and then we'll introduce the rest of the panelists. We've divided today into really 3 segments, and we're going to start things off with a way to look at your network and how to diversify it. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're going to discuss in smaller groups your network and some ideas for diversifying it. And then we'll come back and share some of those stories. And then we're going to wrap with some practical tools, kind of a top 10 list of things that you can do to lead inclusively and diversify your network. So without further ado, let's introduce the rest of the panel. And Julie, I'm going to toss it back to you to pick on you for your why. And while you're doing that, I'll keep an eye on the waiting room so you don't have to worry about that while you're introducing yourself.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff. Yeah, we've got a busy waiting room filling up. So thank you for being an ally and managing that. I'm Julie Krantz, and Jeff and I have had many conversations over the years about diversity and inclusion and allyship. And I've had the pleasure through Jeff collaboratively to meet this amazing group of people that are so passionate in the trenches, leading every day in the tech industry, but also really being allies to people that are of all races, ethnicities, genders, backgrounds. So I'm just so thankful to be a part of this group. And I was muted. That's like the Zoom quote of the year. Unmute yourself. I muted the whole time. So Jeff and I have been super passionate about this for a number of years, putting our heads together and wanting to be a part of the solution to this problem. Like Jeff said, with all those statistics, I think it can get really overwhelming of what should I do to be a part of something overwhelming like anti-racism or gender diversity in the tech industry. And so this is where we collected and combined networks, really the theme of the conversation today, to bring together some amazing leaders in the tech industry. Angel, Nirav, Amy, we collectively known over the years. And I think it just speaks to the power of getting good people together that are passionate and have similar interests, but also really different vantage points to talk about complex issues like diversity and inclusion. So I'm so thankful to be with this team. I have my own business, Next Pivot Point, that's focused on speaking and training on diversity and inclusion, and best known for allyship and how to be an ally. So I'll chime in with some ideas. We're all going to be managing the breakout activity that Amy is so boldly offered to lead us through today about networking. So be prepared to engage there, but this is such an amazing crew. So excited to be with y'all today. I'll go ahead and pass the baton. Amy, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Sorry for accidentally muting you. earlier. That was my fault.
Oh, was I on
Sorry.
mute or off mute?
Just for a little bit. Just for a little bit. Sorry.
A little bit better.
I had a rogue click. So hello, everyone. My name's Amy Waninger. I am the CEO of Lead at Any Level, and I work with organizations that want to build inclusive cultures and diverse leadership bench strength. And I spent 20 years of my career in IT, the last 12 in the insurance industry. And so I've worked just about everywhere in Indy that there is to work. And this topic is of importance to me for so many reasons, but primarily because when I was putting together the activity that we're going to work through in just a few minutes, I realized that I wasn't where I wanted to be as a professional, as an ally, as, you know, a champion for diversity. And it bothered me enough that I changed my behavior. And it wasn't until I changed my behaviors that everything changed for me in my career. And, you know, just by way of example of what changed, I was working in IT in the insurance industry 2 years ago, and now I own a training and consulting business focused on diversity and inclusion and inclusive leadership. So big difference from where I was, but a really positive one in my mind. And, you know, I feel like I've been able to leverage this tool that I'm going to share with you later, not only to create opportunity for myself, but to create opportunities for people around me and to have different people in my inner circle for whom I can create opportunity. And to me, that makes all the difference in the world. And so I'd like to hear next from Angel, if that's okay.
Hi all, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Angel Henry, and my passion is teaching and training. Where I get to do that is in IT. So over 20 years experience in IT, most of that in pharma and healthcare. And I went on a journey about 5 or 6 years ago where I made the conscious decision to move from individual contributor to people manager and people leader. And one of the key things that I learned in my self-education was networking and how critical that was going to be for upward mobility. And I looked around at my network and realized that it looked a lot like me, and the seat that I was trying to get to did not have anyone that looked like me. So if I was going to make that move, I had to diversify my network. And luckily, I had a individual, I shared with her my personal goals, and she invited me to the IT Directors Council here in Indy. And sure enough, I was the only that stepped into that room, the only African-American female, probably stuck out pretty clearly, but that's where I met Jeff Tunn. And Jeff immediately brought me into his network. And we've been in connection ever since, how I met Julie and the others here on this call, and was successful in my endeavors. And so now I, again, with teaching and training as my superpower, I have to train others on what I've learned and determined to stop entering spaces where I'm the only anymore. I have to reach back and ensure that if I'm the only one stepping into the room, when I leave the room, there are others that look like me. So with that, who do we have next? Over to Rob. Hey.
Hey, thank you, Angel. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. I am not at all expert as some of every other panelist on this, so I'm here to learn a lot. The question that was asked during the introduction is, why did we decide to be here? And for me, it was because Jeff and Julie asked, and you never say no to both of them. Now that is one of the reasons, but the main reason I would say is how important and how critical this topic is to me personally. In fact, August is the month where I finished 18 years coming to this wonderful country. And there were experiences that I went through that were not so wonderful. And similar to Amy, in the last around few years, I started thinking about what am I doing besides sharing just those experiences? what am I doing to bring the changes around that? Luckily, I have been blessed to be in a leadership position where I can intentionally do few things, but that only stays in my circle of influence. And unless I widen or broaden the circle of influence, I won't be able to make the change that I would want to see in this world. So, somebody told me, a few years ago, you spend the first 40 years of your life building your career, and you spend the next 40 years building your legacy. In March, I turned 40, so I decided it's time to start building a legacy, and diversity inclusion is definitely a topic to do that. It's going to take years and decades to get to where we need to be, and I hope I can contribute in my own small and a little way. So that's why I'm in here. I hope to learn a lot from all of you. In fact, an example I'll give you of diversifying, my network is, being part of this panel. And I did not know who Amy was until just a month ago, and I'm so glad to meet her. So I recommend people to sign up for panels and discussions because you're always continuing diversifying and meeting more great people. Thank you.
So good. I told you these people are awesome. It's so neat. Hey, and one thing that Jeff did not mention, Mr. Humble, it is his book publish date. Jeff, put a picture up of your book.
Okay, all right, hold on just a second. Can I share over the top of you?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, so let me.
All right. Yeah. So Jeff has today is his published date for Amplify Your Job Search, which is the second, and to amplify your network, right? So
So are you
very
seeing
much
that
timely
now?
topic. Yeah. There you go.
Okay, so thank you, Julie, for mentioning that. I will mention that the book published today for anybody out there who either is in a job transition or knows somebody that is. This would be a valuable resource for them to build their network. There's a large portion of the book that's dedicated to networking. There's a large portion dedicated to journaling. And I will say that chapter 3, I think, talks about Amy's work and the impact that it had on my network. So I would encourage everybody that is in transition or knows somebody that is to pick up a copy. And just to kind of go along with that, coming out very, very soon, although not today, I mentioned that the book has a lot to do with journaling. And so there's a companion journal. It's a lined journal, no new content, but it will help you with your journaling exercises. And then there's one other thing that I'd like to announce today, and that is Julie's birthday. So she joined us today on her birthday. Thank you, Julie, for giving us this time on your birthday. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amy. Is up next, correct?
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Y'all are so sweet. And Nirav, your story resonated with me because I'm 38 today, so I'm almost towards the legacy piece, which diversity has.
You started earlier than I did, which is the right thing to do.
I don't know. It's a journey. It's not a destination.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little late. I don't know about some of you on the call, but.
So I did post in the chat. So if anybody has just joined, I'll reattach that. But as Amy's going through this, be sure to reference the assessment grid file I've gotten there. And Amy, will reshare a screenshot of that.
Okay. And actually, if you'll let me, I will just share mine.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Because mine goes through and shows it filled in.
Okay. So if
Give me
anybody
just 1 second to pull that up.
Perfect. Make it interactive today. So pay attention. We're going to do a breakout exercise.
Yeah.
So you will want to know what you're doing.
Yes, you will absolutely want to follow along. So if you don't have access to a printer, I would ask that you grab a napkin or an electric bill or something that you can write on. Jeff did this on the back of a Starbucks napkin, so you don't need a ton of paper.
That's right. That's right.
And all right, can you see my screen share?
It's coming up right now.
Perfect.
Yep, there we go.
Okay. So first thing I want to do is I want to give you a couple of caveats. The first is we're not going to cover everything because, well, you can't cover everything. We don't have unlimited time. So think about this as a starter kit to get you going, thinking strategically about your network. The second thing I want to say right out of the gate is, there is no one right answer. This is all about how you feel about your results and what you intend to do about it. The first time I took this assessment, immediately after thinking I was brilliant for creating it, I thought I was going to be brilliant for just nailing it, right? And Jeff, I know you can attest to this because you were feeling real good about this for a few minutes and then not so good and a little bit later. And I was the same way. I took my own assessment. I did not like what I saw. I changed everything, and it made all the difference in the world. So I'm not about to share with you anything that you can't do something about if you choose to do so. The first part of this is called Network Like a Champ. CHAMP is an acronym for the 5 people, the 5 kinds of people you need in your network. And in each case, you may have 30 people, you may have 2, you may have 1, you may not have anybody. That's okay. What I want you to do is make this a very top of mind activity. So when I throw out a category, the first person you think of is probably the right answer. The person that you have the best relationship with, that you talk to the most frequently or the most recently. You know, if you've got somebody on speed dial or in your top 5 contacts on your phone, that's the name you want to put down. Okay. So the C stands for customer. Your customer is someone outside your organization. For this exercise, I don't want to hear anybody talk about an internal customer, because internal customers, people within your organization, have access to the same jargon and acronyms and biases and blind spots that you have. You really want to get outside of your organization and think, who are the people who exchange their money for the goods and services my company provides? Because if you're closer to your customer, you'll be able to innovate in the right direction. You will be able to cut out the things that your customers truly don't care about. You'll be able to solve internal problems with your customer in mind. And, you know, I know a lot of folks in IT say, well, I'm not a product designer, right? I don't touch my customer. I'm not in a customer facing role. Doesn't matter. If you're on a team where you're the only person in a non-customer facing role who's actually talking to real live customers, you just got promoted, because you're going to be the one who knows how to innovate in the right direction. And so just be the person that goes out and talks to real customers. Now, your customer has to be the name of a person, not a company. Okay. So not State Farm, Jake from State Farm. All right. So my customer this week is, because I do this frequently, I assess myself all the time because I do these presentations. My customer this week is Vonda. The H is for someone you've hired or helped get a job. Now, we all want to have high value networks. And the best way to do that is to be of value to our networks. And the best way to do that is to help somebody get gainful employment, get a promotion, get their dream job. I was going to call this referral, but nobody wants to network like a cramp. So we went with the H. So if you're a hiring manager, put the name of the last person you hired. If you're not a hiring manager, that's okay. Who have you in the last couple of months written a letter of recommendation for, introduced to a hiring manager, did a warm handoff to a recruiter that you trust in your industry? Put that person's name here. With me so far? Julie, Jeff, thumbs up? Okay. So the A is for your associate or work buddy. And this is the person, back when we could interact with other humans in real space and time, this is the person that you probably went out for coffee with, or maybe something a little stronger after work if you had a rough day. Pretty much your work buddy. Somebody who has about the same level of responsibility as you. And maybe in your company, but maybe not, right? Kind of a pacing partner. And so for me, I listed Zach this week. M is for your mentor. Now, your mentor may be someone assigned to you through an association or, some sort of a development program at work. That's fine. If you have a formal mentor, put them down. If you have somebody in your network that you think of as a mentor, put their name down. And then ask yourself, have I ever told them I think of them that way? And if the answer to that is no, please make an action item to go talk to them about that. Because some people go their whole careers not knowing what kind of an impact they have. And I've found that when people have a positive impact on me, telling them is a really good way to start to return that favor. Now, if you don't know somebody personally that you think of as a mentor, think about what business books or career books have you read recently? Whose podcasts do you listen to? Whose webinars do you attend? Whose blogs do you follow? And if there's somebody that you pretty, regularly tune into and follow their advice, put their name down. That's fine. The P is for protege. A protege is somebody that you've taken under your wing to help them because you see their potential and you really want to see them succeed. Not because it's good for you, but because it's good for them. All right, so I want to ask real quick, and we can use the chat for this. I think it might be easiest since everybody doesn't have their camera on. But let's use the chat feature real quick. I would like to know how many out of 5, from 0 to 5, how many do you have in your champ network? So I have 5. I'll put 5 in the chat. 5, 4, 4, 5, 5, 3. Okay. Mostly 4s and 5s, couple of 3s. Saw a 2 in there. So if you are, if you're looking at this and you don't have all 5, that's okay. The P is for protege. And I'll go through these again before we break. So it's customer, hire or help, an associate, a mentor, and a protege. And let me also say that even if you're only 5 minutes into your career, you're 5 minutes ahead of somebody else. So no excuses about not having a protege. If you don't have all 5 people in your network, that's okay. But think about where could you go to meet people who would fit these categories? And I realize we're in an online world now and everybody's, we're all networking on social media, but that almost makes it easier in some ways because it's much easier to get into a Slack channel maybe than it is to show up at a conference. Or, it's easier to follow some folks on social media or join a user group online as opposed to, getting your boss to pay to send you somewhere for a few days. So get creative about where can you show up to find these folks so that you can start to build the right relationships for your network. And I think you'll find when you have all 5, you have a pretty robust view of your career, of your company, of your industry, and, kind of a 360-degree view of what's going on. So you'll know not only where to go next, but you'll also have a good idea of how far you've already come. So I want to stop there and ask if there are any questions before we move forward. And thank you, Nira, for putting the acronym in the chat. Okay, hearing no questions, I assume that everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about, or you're asleep. Either way, moving forward. Okay, so now I want to talk about what perspectives does your network ignore? Because what happens is a lot of times we tend to fill our networks with people who look just like us. And that'll only get us so far. So the first part of this is to put an X in the I column next to anyone who works in a different industry than you do. So for me, I have I equals 4, and I would love it if you would put an I and an equals and a number in the chat so I can see what we're doing here. So a lot of times when I do this in person, I'll see the same people that said they had all 5 champs because they're pretty tenured in their careers, right? They feel real good about themselves. About time we get to that P, they're like, oh, I've aced this thing. But then I say, well, how many people outside your industry? And usually the longer people have been in their careers, the fewer people they know outside their industry because they've sort of evolved their career into an echo chamber. And so that may be the case for some of you. But we want to get outside of our industry. Why? Because the future of our industry is already happening somewhere else. And any problem that we can solve for someone in another industry is a business opportunity. Doug, you can't have 20. This is a top of mind activity. You're only allowed to have 5.
I was like, how did Doug multiply? Does he know a new rule?
I don't know. I'm going to assume that he's either really good at math or has a typo. We've got some exponential work going on here. Okay, so we want to get outside of our industry, right? Because we want to have opportunities to share what we know in our industry. We want to sell products or services for money. That's what business is. But we also want to be able to innovate. We want to be able to learn. We want to be able to solve problems in different ways. And as a speaker for the last few years, I've noticed when I go to the education conferences and the IT conferences and the insurance conferences and the financial services conference, everybody's trying to solve the same problem, and everybody's looking at themselves to figure out how to do it best. And if they would talk to each other, they would probably have a lot more opportunity. Okay, the first G is for generational difference. So I'm not going to break out the generation chart, but let's say for the purposes of tonight, if the person you think is at least 10 years older than you or 10 years younger than you, put an X in the first G column. And if you're a Gen Xer, this is your moment. At no other time will being in Gen X ever be of value to you or an advantage in any way, except for right now when we have people older than us in the workforce and younger than us in the workforce. I've created this moment for you. You're welcome. Jeff, you can laugh, but you know, Gen Xers get no love, especially in the workplace. So I'm seeing some ones and twos come in. You know, we want to connect with people who have more tenure than we do because they can put things into perspective that we just can't. But we also need to keep an eye on the folks that are new to the workforce or not yet in the workforce, right? Because the whole economy is changing around these people. And they are expecting completely new ways to interact with the world, with the products and services they consume, with their employers and their coworkers. And if we don't keep in tune with what's coming, we're going to quickly find ourselves obsolete. Okay, I won't ask you to share any more beyond this point because I don't want anyone to feel embarrassed or exposed. We're going to get into some topics that may be a little bit more sensitive. So the next G is for gender identity different from yours. What I mean by this is I'm a cisgender woman, so I would put an X next to anyone who is not a cisgender woman, meaning anyone who is a transgender woman, a cisgender man, a transgender man, or a non-binary individual. Now, cisgender, for those of you who don't know, means that when I was born, the doctors said it's a girl, and they were right. But not everyone has that experience. It's important to me as a woman to be networked with men. Why? Well, men have most of the C-suite positions in the Fortune 500 and elsewhere. And if I'm not networked with the right people, I don't have access to decisions or budgets. I don't have access to sponsors that I need to get me in the door or to get me into the right seat, kind of like what Angel was saying earlier. But similarly, if I don't have good relationships with the men that I work with, they have no idea what it's like to be a woman in their industry or in their company because they don't see things the way I see them. They don't hear the things I hear. They're not there when people make certain comments. And so I think it's important that we have those cross-gender relationships so that we're able to share that kind of information and break down some of those barriers. And just like I want my male colleagues to be there to advocate for me when I'm not in the room, I need to be there to advocate for my transgender and non-binary colleagues. Because, you know, trans women have a 4 times higher likelihood of living in extreme poverty, under $10,000 a year. It's hard to get a job when your gender presentation doesn't match your issued ID. It's hard to get a job when you're not sure if you'll be able to use the restroom without harassment or assault. Trans women of color and Black trans women in particular face the highest murder rates of anyone in this country per capita. And non-binary individuals face the highest suicide rates. Now, it's really hard for people to have decision-making power if they can't even get in the company. They can't even make it in the front door. And if they can't even make it in the front door, how are they ever going to get to a place where they can influence policy? So I think it's incumbent upon those of us who are inside to do what we can to make sure that those doors are open to everyone. Oops, sorry. The N is for national origin or native language different from your own. Now, I have to tell you, I'm a little embarrassed because this week I did not have someone in this category that was top of mind or that I'd spoken with recently. And that means I need to be more intentional about how I go about my network next week and who I talk to and who I connect with and who I reach out to. So I'm going to be more intentional about that in the next few weeks to make sure that I'm not missing some perspectives. But it's important that we get outside of our own cultural background when we talk to people, because we often take things for granted or as universal truths that simply aren't so. My favorite example of this is I worked with a guy, he moved here from India, and a lot of us live in Indianapolis. I know some of you don't, but hopefully you'll appreciate this story nonetheless. He lived in Boston for 3 years before he moved to Indy. And when he got to Indy, he was in for a second culture shock because he didn't realize that Bill Belichick and the Patriots were not universally loved across America. So sometimes even when we get outside of our own cultural environment, we still take certain things for granted, but we don't know until we make those exchanges. The O is for sexual orientation different from yours. Now, a lot of times I'll hear people say, well, somebody's sexual orientation is really none of my business. At which point I say, okay, but do you have a picture of your family on your desk at work? Do you talk about your spouse? Oh, absolutely. Well, isn't that making your sexual orientation everybody else's business? I know a lot of folks who are afraid to put their photos of their families on their desks because they're afraid that they'll be ostracized by their teams, shunned by their managers, or even fired from their jobs. And until just a few weeks ago, that was legal in most of the US. The other thing I hear a lot is, well, I don't have anything against people in the LGBTQ community, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, but I don't work with anybody like that. Oh, honey, yes, you do. Half of all LGBTQ people are not out at work for all those reasons I just mentioned. And if you think you don't work with anybody from that community, it's probably because they don't feel safe enough to tell you. So I would encourage you not to go ask everybody what's your gender identification and sexual orientation, because that will get you slugged or sent to HR or both. But to think about what are the ways that you can show yourself to be an ally before you're needed. How can you speak up? Maybe it's something as simple as, when your brother and his husband come to visit, don't talk about them in hushed tones, right? Don't look over your shoulder before you say it. Simple things like that can make a huge difference because people really are looking for allies, and they will take any chance they get to find one. Speaking of, the R is for a different race or ethnicity than you. Now, while I know that there are races beyond black and white, I want to speak very, very clearly here. Anti-Black racism is one of the most deadly worldviews that people in the United States hold. And it's not just explicit anti-Black racism that's a problem. It's also the implicit racism. It's the people who don't speak up and don't say anything. And the reason we have this problem is that for 400 years in this country, we have had laws about who could live where and who could own property. And for 256 of those years, who could be property. Those laws have systematically kept us separated. We live in a segregated society, not just in the South where Jim Crow was the law, but also in the North where redlining was the policy. Because of this, and those of you who live in Indy know, where in town you can find an authentic taqueria, right? Where in town you're going to find, the most authentic Indian food, where in town you're going to find the best soul food, where in town you're going to find on and on and on, right? We are still segregated. Because our communities are segregated, our schools, our churches are segregated. The most integrated place most of us go is work. And yet 75% of white people don't have a Black friend, which means 75% of white people are lying about having a Black friend. If you've never noticed this before, you have no excuse tomorrow. We have to do better for the onlys in our offices. We have to do better so that folks like Angel come in and don't have a completely different cultural experience than the rest of us. Because a lot of times when you're the only in the room, well-meaning, quote unquote, well-meaning white people don't say anything because they don't want to say the wrong thing. And if well-meaning people don't say anything, who does that leave them with? We have to do better for each other. We have to be the reason someone stays in our organization. We have to be the reason someone feels welcome and included. So if you work with someone who's an only, no more excuses, go get uncomfortable. Go make a new friend. Be awkward, apologize, do better the next day. This is important work. Okay, the E. So if you think about CHAMP as the depth of your network, and you think about the I through R in ignore as the breadth of your relationships, of your network, think about E as the depth of each individual relationship. E is for an exchange of stories. And what I want you to do here is put an X in the E column next to anyone that you've shared the kind of stories with that they know how your values were formed or tested. When you struggled personally, professionally, financially, emotionally, or in a relationship. They know when you were at a crossroads, what you chose and why. And you know those things about them. Because almost every single one of us has gotten some opportunity based on a relationship. It's usually not an acquaintance. It's usually not a contact that we know from work that we never talked to. It's the people with whom we've shared these kinds of stories. Stories build trust, especially across difference. Trust builds relationships, and relationships make or break careers. And I'm asking you to be more intentional in where you build those relationships and with whom, so that we can all share opportunities with others and not necessarily with the people we would naturally have on speed dial. Julie, back to you.
Awesome. All right. Clarifying questions. So all of us are going to join a breakout room. So you're not going to be left to your own devices. We're going to do 5 breakout rooms so that Angel, Jeff, Nirav, and Amy and I can join you. I put some questions in the chat. And we already answered national origin or native language. So just some thought questions as we're transitioning to breakouts is, you don't have to be bold and share your whole grid. This is a bit of a vulnerable exercise, but we want to make sure you all feel safe. And this is a brave place to contribute and share, just how do you feel? Temperature check. What surprised you? Maybe something that you want to work on. And know that everyone that joined this call joined because networking is something that they want to get better at, especially with diversity. And I love some of the stats you shared, Amy. We've all got work to do in this space so we can all get better. So let's lean into some candid conversations. We're going to give you 20 minutes. So perfect timing, 5 o'clock Eastern time is when we'll come back. I'm going to send everyone to their rooms and enjoy a good discussion.
Uh-oh, we have Julie with us.
You didn't get a facilitator, did you yet? I think I counted correctly. Whew, that's the most stressful part of all this is finding. Hey, everybody. All right, cool. So did everyone understand the exercise?
Yes.
No. Still thinking. So I think, I was jotting down some notes. Admittedly, my grid is not all complete. So I thought what we'll do is just kind of share some moments around the group of, hey, just thinking through this activity, what what kind of jumped out at you as far as how you felt, kind of where you might have some work to do? So I think just in the spirit of us all being candid and knowing we have some work to do in this space, what y'all think of this? I think, I'll just kind of jump off and lead. I've done this a few times. I try to reflect on this at least monthly to think about who I'm not spending time with more so, just like Amy did. You're going to have some blanks. Like there's some areas that's like, I got to do better at this. And for me, when I first did this about 3 years ago, it was race. It was very, very clear I was spending a lot of time with white people, especially white women, so gender too. And I realized there's a term in the diversity space called affinity bias, unconscious bias, that I was spending time with people like me, business owner, white women. And that's something that I realized, and once I became aware of it, it was something I had to intentionally get better at. So really being intentional with who I reached out to broaden that network was something that actively still, diligently, like I said, a monthly exercise of going through this, thinking about it. But I will say it's like a springboard. Once you reach out to somebody that's different than you, they introduce you to people that are different, much like Jeff and I have been talking. A lot of these variables Jeff and I are really different on, where we have race in common. That's really it. So it's amazing when you surround yourself with diverse people, how you can get exposure to diverse groups. So that's my thought. Who else wants to share?
For me, I think the awakening one was the discussion on orientation. And what got me thinking about it was what it got me thinking about was more around how deep are the relationships that I have. And I even started thinking through and thinking back to others that I could have on my champ list. And there's not a lot of people that I would say that I know their orientation. Whereas, when I look at the other categories, I could have a whole bunch of different people that I think I have good relationships with. I won't say deep anymore. Good relationships with that fit into those other categories, but that was one that not a lot.
Well, and the stat Amy shared, 50% of people are closeted in the workspace.
Yeah.
So you probably do know. That's the part that always surprises me, right? You do, but you don't know, or maybe someone's not chosen to be out about that.
Right. Yeah. I know two people that I worked with that were out, but they just didn't happen to call them out on the list, right? Because of the way the exercise was going. But even that, considering all the people that I know, the fact that I can only name two that I know is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's an opportunity. Cool. Thank you for sharing that, Don. I appreciate it. Who else wants to share?
I'm going to, go ahead, Paula.
No, go ahead, Kat.
I was just going to say, I agreed with what Don said. That was really a moment for me where I was like, wow, I had to sit back for a second and really think about it. And my customers, I work for Checkpoint, so, my customers, both tech companies and students, and it's crazy to even think about from a student perspective. We are very inclusive with our language. We're always trying to make sure that we're in line with all the different ways that people could self-identify with gender. But when I really think about, when I look at that final roster of students we work with, how many people identify themselves as non-binary or other self-identifying terms for sexual orientation, it is very low, maybe 1 or 2 students per about 150 to 200. So those numbers are really small from a college and university perspective, but then if that's not being set up appropriately at that level in internships and the way that they're experiencing working within industry, specifically in tech, how are we going to then transition them to go work for a company where they feel comfortable sharing their sexual orientation? So that was a huge takeaway for me, is just from both a company perspective and from a university perspective, how are we setting people up for success and feeling comfortable in being able to share that in a work environment. So Don, everything you said, I agree with.
Thanks, Kat. That's awesome. Yeah, really good perspective you have there with young people, especially. And Gen Z is the most diverse generation that we have. And historically, that's true of younger generations. But because especially immigration peaked in the early 2000s, we're seeing that generation really demands diversity and inclusion. It's a non-negotiable in the workplace. So it's, I think, a really cool way to look at it too, Kat. Awesome. Who else wants to share?
I can go. I think the thing that maybe I'm just like not looking at my network appropriately with the champ thing, because if I look at the people that I interact with online in my friends group, I have got all of Ignore covered, like full board covered, right? But if I have to try and like line them up as champ with my current position, I can't do it, right? I can't even think of anybody I've helped to get hired off the top of my head, right? And I know I don't talk to our customers because I'm in IT and I'm a scrum master. My customers are the teams internally, right? If I'm talking to somebody who's like, who's purchasing our locks, that's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I've got, it's just weird. Like I said, I can go through all of the Ignore and I can name people and have a pile of them in each of those categories. But if I put them in if I crosswalk them to champ, I got very little.
Yeah. It's situational. It changes, it ebbs and flows. So interesting, Paula. Okay, thanks for that observation. Who else?
I guess I'll go next. Sorry you guys can't see me. I'm having webcam.
Hi, James.
So let's do black male honorary discharge safeguard. And I started thinking about this particular exercise, how they would classify on the network. So
Hey, James, I think you're cutting out quite a bit. I don't know if
it might be bandwidth where I am.
It comes in clearly for just a few seconds and then goes back out.
Oh, okay. Sometimes we up in other people's network.
It might be better to check your responses, James, until you can find a good network signal. I'm afraid we're not hearing you.
Okay, fair enough.
Now, of course, it's clear. So.
I'll chat it.
Okay, chat it, and then we'll try you one more time. Amy, I know you're on video. Do you want to share?
Yeah, I was going to share really similar to Paula. If I separate out my personal connections and personal life and my professional life, they look very different. But it is eye-opening then to think, I'm in a hiring role all day, right? So that category was super easy to fill across the board. The person I chose didn't necessarily check all the boxes, but if I put up all of those, I would feel good about that. But past that, I'm in a really homogenous professional environment. So I really need to think about how I can influence that and continue to move us forward as an organization, which also moves my personal network forward.
Yeah, I think it's a good activity holistically for kind of looking at the future and where you want to recruit and how you want to diversify your team. Yeah, that's cool. And I think all those filters at the top kind of give you those headings from a recruiting and hiring perspective. A lot of the clients I'm working with are like, how do I recruit and hire diversely, like especially in light of everything that's happened this summer. It's like, okay, we got to kind of think about where we really want to, why that matters to us and how we want to build a team that's inclusive so that we can recruit and hire that talent too. So the things all come together. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Amy. Awesome. Who else? So I think Zoe, I see you, Dave. And then I think James, we struggled with hearing, but maybe he can chat. Looks like he chatted. Oh, Dave has. I have a very diverse network, but my answers show a really strong affinity bias because the people came to mind in the names I filled in. Yeah, isn't that funny how we do that? It's like, oh, they're like me. And this is, we're kind of fighting this primal urge that we have as humans based on our evolution. We used to kind of look to other people that looked like us, thought like us, behaved like us as people we could trust when we were hunting and gathering. So only the last 10 to 12,000 years of our human history have we really been this diverse. So we're struggling, we're kind of fighting this neuroscience of our old wiring. So if that's you, like me, like it's not that anything's wrong with you. It's just we have to really intentionally think about diversity and inclusion if we want to get better at it.
Julie, I would say that the when you're talking about when we stopped being so tribal, it was a whole lot more recently than that.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's just
Okay,
like modern.
It's not like 10, 20,000. It's like 40.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, depending on how you describe modern civilization. That's right, Paula. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. James okay, so James was struggling with the audio, but it looks like he got the video or the chat on. I'm a Black male who served in the U.S. Coast Guard. I can check the boxes, but this exercise made me think about what aspects of my background I hide. My religion is Islam, and I love to let people think I'm Christian, as this is associated with patriotism. Isn't that interesting? My wife is Indian. If you were to attend a family reunion, you could make a Benetton poster. Traveling in military circles does not have bias against genders. Yeah, isn't that so interesting? The military is so diverse. I know people that grew up moving frequently and being exposed to different cultures and ethnicities naturally have an inclination towards this topic. So that's really cool to hear about your background. And thanks for sharing the religious perspectives too, James. So interesting. Good. All right. Anybody else? Zoe, I don't think we heard from you. Did you want to share?
Yes. So my network is pretty diverse, but mostly because I make it a point for it to be, because it's important. I'm an independent consultant, so a lot of it is external through professional organizations, many of which are related to cybersecurity, because that's what I do now. And yeah, so really only because I actively seek it and build it and collaborate with others who are also dedicated to building it. There are definitely biases, and they're very extreme. I realize sometimes people assume that I am a male when I use my hacker name on certain projects. So that is definitely something that we need to address, especially going forward with Gen Z.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that Amy's talk kind of illuminated for me and what you're sharing, am I saying your name correctly, Zoe?
Yes.
Okay. That pronouns, I think, are a really interesting part of this conversation. And I used to think, at first when this kind of came up a couple years ago, I was like, why do I have to share my pronouns? I'm a woman. People know I'm a woman, right? Like, I was just very, naive about the whole thing. Then I compared notes with other people and I was like, oh, okay, this is a bigger deal than I thought. And what a privilege I have to be cisgender. And then I started adding my pronouns to, my LinkedIn and my email signature. And most of the time it goes unnoticed, or people, I think it does make a bigger difference to people that might have different gender identities and sexual orientations too. And I had a friend reach out, a friend of my daughter's mother reached out and said, hey, I saw your signatures, pronouns, and I want you to know that my son is in middle school and he is gay, and we haven't been open about it, but I know you're somebody I could talk to about it. And so that's just such a big deal. That was such a big deal to me to be like, oh, this is why if we all put ourselves out there and people can understand our identities, it frees up everyone to be their true authentic selves and to feel that safe place to have a shared experience and to talk. So just sharing that, I think, Zoe, it's we can all get better at some of these things. That was one thing that, it kind of illuminated for me in my journey.
Well said.
Please.
Yeah, very well said. Great points. Yeah.
Other thoughts? So we're going to go back in 2 minutes, but other thoughts that you had as you were completing this exercise, anything stick out to you, or thoughts on what to do with this information?
I thought it was interesting that we heard it a couple of different times in terms of covering throughout this conversation, where you might not know someone's gender identity, you might not know their orientation or their religion. So finding ways to open yourself up to exchange stories and learn that information over time and build some trust within your network is really critical, because just because you don't know doesn't mean it's not happening, or you can't be a better ally.
Yeah, that's so true. And so the word covering that Amy used is filtering who you are, and knowing that people are doing that hard work in one of those dimensions, that top part. People are, just like James's story did a great job of that, covering, they call it code switching sometimes too. So the more you don't identify with the majority group, white, male, cisgender, straight, fill in the blank, the more you tend to do that. And you don't even know you're doing it. I didn't even know I was doing it in corporate America, but I was acting a lot more masculine because I worked a lot with men. But certainly those experiences get way more complex the more intersectional experiences you have. And just keeping an eye out for other people that are having to do that hard work a lot more than we might have to be an ally for them.
And I find this time of year similar to what Jane said, right? Like, I'm not sharing my political beliefs because it's at work, right? But it's part of who I am, and I find myself covering it all the time.
I bet. It's so tiring to not be able to talk about what's happening in the news. I mean, it's dominating the news cycle. How do we turn that off at work? It just seems unrealistic. Yeah.
Because we're not seeing anybody anymore. And so you can only talk about work things at work, right?
Yeah, there's no
because you're only online.
That's so interesting. So interesting. All right, I'm going to close out the rooms, which will give everybody a 1-minute warning to go back in. Thanks y'all for sharing. I appreciate your vulnerability and your authenticity, and we'll join back with the larger group and do some lessons learned.
Thanks, everyone.
And I'm totally turning the camera back off.
That is A-okay. I'll just take a few seconds.
Julie, we are back.
We are back.
All right, well, great discussion.
Good. 20 minutes flies by. I know we had some drop off. It's funny when people drop off for breakout rooms. I've myself done that. I wasn't expecting a breakout. So thank you everyone for bravely joining a breakout. We know this is a vulnerable exercise, so the intent was not for anybody to compare or have a competition about how diverse your network is. We all have hard work to do here. So I hope everyone learned something from the exercise and got some good takeaways.
Well, we're not going to compare, but my group was the best, just saying.
Awesome.
Have the advantage of really good leadership, Jeff.
Yeah, there you go.
And humble leadership at that.
Exactly, yeah.
What was all that humility to start earlier? Now, 1 hour in, the gloves are off.
See what happens when you let him plug his book, Julie?
That's right, yeah, just goes to his head, doesn't it?
That's awesome. Well, as we're getting folks to join us back, go ahead and share. My group had 2 dogs. Go ahead and share in the chat box with everybody if you can. Just something you took away from that exercise, that whether you learned something from your group, learned something about yourself, learned something from the facilitator. And then we're going to go around and just quickly debrief some stories and ideas that we've gotten on the facilitation team. And then we promise to leave you with some actionable tips at the end too. So stick around. We will honor our stop time here in half an hour, but we'd love to hear lessons learned from the exercise on the chat. Jeff, do you want to share, since your group clearly won? Do you want to share what you learned from your group?
Well, I think the big takeaway from my perspective from our group was that everybody had gaps, and everybody has felt the need to be more intentional. One of the reasons why probably many attended today's event was to be more intentional and to learn some new things. So I think the other takeaway was in doing the exercise, if you looked at only the 5 people that you had written down in your CHAMP network, there were far more gaps. But if you went to maybe 10 or 15 people, some of the gaps started being filled, but not all of them. So do we want to go to group 2? I don't know who was group 2.
I think we were, if I'm not mistaken. I popped in and out a couple of groups there for a second. But
Go ahead, Angel.
Okay, well, go ahead. I'm the group with the 2 Dougs, so that was cool. But yeah, for us, there was some great learnings in terms of when you switch industries, or if you go from working at an organization that is really large and global, but then you move to being an entrepreneur, then your network shifts and it might lessen. So the opportunities that you had when you were in that large organization at your company to network with folks of different genders and ethnicities, that might change when you go to be a sole proprietorship, right? So there's something there. And then 2, what was interesting in terms of, we all said, we've got to be intentional. When we look around our societies and professional associations that we attend, if we're not seeing diversity there, then what can we do? Who can we reach out to invite them to the next meeting or invite them to the next gathering that's someone that's diverse? And then lastly, about something that's like so super easy, the lowest entry level possible. And I think it was John Michael that said it, was simply follow somebody on Twitter or a social media that's not like you, that might have different views than you, that looks different than you. That way you can see what they're saying and then see by association who their networks are. That might lead you 2 or 3 folks down, then you connect with them. So the one caveat there is that social media, you got to be careful when you're shooting out those tweets or on your own Facebook. Be careful not to put your foot in your mouth if you're just new to that space, because you might unintentionally say something you shouldn't or offend. So be careful, but when you start following, follow in observation mode and really listen to what it is that the individual is tweeting about or sharing on social media. You can really glean some interesting facts from a different perspective.
So good. Such a good summary, Angel. Awesome. Well said. Amy, you want to share?
Sure. So before I share about my group, I want to go back to a couple of things Jeff said, if I may. And that is, if you go a couple levels deeper in your network, you have more folks, right? You have more diversity. And that is absolutely true. I was giving this presentation to a national group of diversity practitioners a couple summers ago. And I had this woman sitting in the front row, and I could see her face, like she was not happy with me, right? About halfway through this exercise. And I said, what's going on for you? And she said, well, I know all these people, meaning, all the people on the ignore side, right? She goes, I know all those people, but they're not the ones I wrote down. And I said, right, you work with executives, right? She said, oh yeah. I said, and you want them to find good people who are diverse for high profile projects, right? She said, yes. And I said, and for grooming them for your role, right? She said, yes. And I said, and for calling on them when there's an open spot in leadership, yes. And I said, who do you think they have on speed dial? It's those people in the top 5. They know the people over here, right? But it's not who's top of mind. And so we have to be intentional about who's top of mind. So I want to make sure, Jeff, that that it's not just IT folks that have those gaps, and it's not just IT folks that think that way. We all get to that. A couple of really good takeaways from our group. Going back to the LinkedIn thing is, one of our folks said, I think it was Jacob, said, I just need to go back through LinkedIn and look at who haven't I talked to lately, that now would be a really good time to connect with them, because maybe they're in a place where I could help them or vice versa. And, people's circumstances change all the time, right? So it's always good to reach out. David said that, when he's recruiting, he likes to cast a wide net beyond referrals, because when you use internal referrals for new talent, you tend to kind of get the same people in the doors you've already got. And so it's good to expand your horizons a little bit. And we talked about one way to do that is to go to some of these organizations like Black Girls Code or Women in High Tech. I'm sure that there are others. I'm sure that there's a Black Tech org somewhere in Indy. Having been out of tech for a couple of years, I've kind of lost touch with what all the little subgroups are, but there's always some niche version of your wider population, right, that you can go to, and that you can call on that leadership to say, look, we're adding some folks to our team and we want to make sure that we expand in the right direction. Do you have anyone who might be interested in this spot? And then Laura said, she goes to meetups, but it's usually inside the industry. And one thing that we know about tech is everywhere in every industry. So even if you're not at a tech meetup, you're likely to run into tech people at a meetup for retail, or at a meetup for, healthcare, or a meetup for the restaurant industry, right? Because tech folks are everywhere. So if they identify first with their industry and second with their function, then you might just be passing each other and not even know it. So those were some of our takeaways.
So good. Nirav, do you want to share?
Yeah, I can go next. So before I go ahead and start sharing, I want to share my personal experience in the last 20 minutes when we were in a breakout room. And remember, Jeff, in the first diversity and inclusion meeting we had, we talked about an experience you had specifically when you went to a meeting with all female, and I had a similar experience. It was myself and another gentleman called Brandon, and we had an all female, and you feel the difference, right? And I could understand how a specific minority group, whether it's a female or whether it's an African American, would feel when a meeting room or a boardroom is filled with white male, and when they walk in to just facilitate a discussion. In this case, it was just facilitating a discussion, and I could just feel different, right? So it's important. It was another reminder of how empathetic leader we all should be. I'll go back to some of the discussions we had. So obviously there was a major discussion about, as we look at the grid, a lot of people found surprises. A lot of people were surprised of how less diverse the network was. But then they started thinking about how pandemic had even made it worse, because they haven't been able to continue to stay in touch with even the network that were diverse in the first place. So there was a discussion about, and I saw Jeff, you post this on the chat as well. There was a discussion about being intentional about it, writing down list of names that you want to stay in touch with, and then scheduling those coffees. At least do 1 or 2 coffees a week. It can be virtual, but you definitely continue in that relationship building and learning from each other. There was a discussion about a specific organization not being very diverse, and the realization that, okay, well, my workplace is not providing me the enough diversity that I would have liked, but I was very diverse outside of work. I had a lot of personal relationships that were very diverse. And because I've been spending so much time at workplace or with my work buddies, I have not been able to keep those relationships. And the homework there was to go back and start reestablishing those relationships to begin with, right? So there was a discussion around that. There was discussion around specifically calling out protege, which is something more in our control, and trying to intentionally provide more diversity there. Because some of the others, maybe the customer side or maybe the associate side might not be in your control as much as you would like, but protege and mentors are definitely something more in your control. So there was discussion around that. We talked about social media, even looking at our LinkedIn profile and seeing what we believe, are we really diverse or are we not as diverse as we think? One of the things I mentioned, and this is personal to me, and this came outside after our conversation, Amy, a month ago when you did this exercise with us. Realization I came, and I just want to share with the group, which was, we talk about every single company and every single organization to have a very diverse board of directors. And the reason we say that is because that's going to make the company more successful, different opinions, avoid group things, right? And we forget to say the same thing about us as a personal. So coming out of that, I said, I'm going to have my own personal board of directors. That's going to be a very diverse group. And every time I make a big decision, whether it's changing my career, moving, being as brave as you are, Amy, which I don't think I am, or going to another job, or some big decisions, I'm going to go and talk to those board of directors, because I need those diverse opinion and not a group think or just one way of thinking. So we talked about it, and I know a couple of people ended up liking that. There is one question that was kind of at the end, which I would like, Amy, if you can little bit talk to us about, and it was about exchange, where a lot of people, including myself, we felt that we have struggled with E, which is the depth of our relationship or depth of our conversations, and we don't know why. There was discussion about, and for me personally, it was a lot about trying to fit in, or being acceptable, so you don't put yourself in a vulnerable position. And a lot of time you have to be vulnerable, and you have to really be honest and honest to who you are, rather than trying to fit in. So any comments there on that specific? Why do people find exchange or the depth of relationship more difficult?
Well, there are a number of answers to that. I'll start with, what is traditionally held as professional is based on white male archetypes, straight white male archetypes, right? So you play everything very close to the vest, you're very buttoned up, you don't share much about your personal life, we're all business, and until the martinis and the golf carts, and then everything changes, right? Well, some of us don't have access to martinis and golf carts, and those of us who don't have that access tend to be more vulnerable automatically, right? So it's higher risk. If I share a story about vulnerability in the workplace, I'm more likely to be seen as weak, ineffective, etc., than Jeff, for example, would be, right? And so I think it's incumbent upon leaders, once you have the title, regardless of what you look like, once you have the title, you need to set the bar for vulnerability, where you're being very honest with people about the struggles that you've had. And I think one of the ways that we lose talent, especially women, people of color, people with disabilities, is that we don't, as leaders, share those stories. People can't see themselves in us because we look too polished, we look too perfect, we look too invulnerable, right? And so it's that breaking down that facade that allows people to connect with us, to be invested in our success, so they want to help us succeed. Well, what is leadership but getting other people to help you succeed? And the only way we do that across a diverse workforce is with our stories. Yeah. So, if you're not in a position of power, I understand, right? If you're not in a de facto leadership position, I understand that hesitancy. But if you are, this is your responsibility now. And especially if you are in the demographic of straight white male, right, where you've had, kind of this privilege for a while of not having to be vulnerable and being able to lead with authority. This is the way women lead, right? We lead typically, not to be too broad stroke about this, but we tend to lead with stories and empathy. And it's effective, right? But it's not always valued. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to ask questions like, oh my gosh, where did you come from, right? And one of my favorite questions when people join a team is to say, I'm really glad you're here. How can I help you feel included? Because you'll learn a lot about somebody in that question and in their answer to it.
It's a really good question. Yeah. And curiosity.
Thank you.
There's such good questions that generate curiosity. Like, tell me about you, your background. And I love all the sharing that's happening here. So people are sharing their LinkedIn profile links. So go ahead and click on folks and connect with them. Find time for a virtual coffee. The thing I'd add, the pandemic, obviously, ideally we'd be doing this in person, but we gave up on that a long time ago. But if you think about the silver linings of the pandemic, never has there been more access to diverse talent. So I don't know how many times living here in Central Indiana, people are like, well, we're in Central Indiana, so we can only be so diverse. That excuse it was never a good one. It is not a good one now. So I will really challenge you on that. We have a pretty wide array of people on nationally today. So that's awesome. That's a benefit. Get to know people globally. Have virtual coffees, 20 minutes of your time. That's what we used to spend driving to a coffee meeting. You know? Take the opportunity and please let's limit that excuse about diverse talent going forward. The other thing I'd say in my group that came up, two terms that surfaced in a lot of your all stories is covering. So how when you're the only one you cover or you filter, and putting up your ally radar for when someone else is having to do that, right? So we mentioned being the only woman, being the only person of color. Someone shared a religious example in our group, political beliefs, whatever it is right now that makes you the other, just being aware of when someone feels like the other. And that's a really great time to demonstrate allyship and to also, you know, make sure that you have people in your network, right? In this exercise that might often feel like the only. The other thing was affinity bias. So unconscious bias will tell you that we have a strong inclination towards people like us. So if you did your top 5, and this is Amy's whole point of her exercise, you might go deeper than that, do better than that beyond your top 5, but your top 5 are probably people like you, that look like you, think like you, went to the same college, you know, whatever it is. But we naturally gravitate towards people like us. So not that we're off the hook, right? But our primal brains are wired for this. We used to assess trust this way. In the primitive days, your tribe looked like you, kind of. So our brains haven't caught up with the world as it is today and the benefits of diversity and having different perspectives and different backgrounds at the table. So just all that to say, recognize when you have that affinity bias. There is a label. I think words really help us understand when it's happening and help other people recognize when it's happening to them and challenge people. It's so much about that richness of the people you're spending a lot of time with, like in this exercise, beyond just that deeper net of people too. So some good stories coming in here. Be sure to connect on LinkedIn. Just in the last 10 minutes or so, we're just going to wrap up with some practical tools and strategies. I've been teaching this work in my business for the last 6 years and doing it collectively for the last decade or so. So I know what y'all are thinking right now, like, this was great, but what am I supposed to do? Right? And I used to be like, figure it out, get all frustrated. And now I take a deep breath and I think, no, we can make this simpler. So folks in the D&I space like myself, I think we have, and myself to blame, have made this a little more complicated than we need to. I want to try to make it simple, but please don't take this top 10 list as like the things you do to check off, okay? So diversity inclusion is not a one and done, check the box exercise. I think we can all see from the events of this summer, we have a lot of work to do, right? So you're never going to show up as the perfect ally. You're never going to be the perfect white person to your Black friends, or, you know, gender, all of these wrinkles and dimensions of diversity. Centuries of inequality will not be undone in swift, non-intentional action. So I do want to share just some jumping off points. I call it choose your own adventure. Okay, so there's no one size fits all approach to this. You may like one, you may like none, you may invent your own. And I invite you to share in the chat box if you've taken away something different you want to add to or edit to this list, and we'll invite our panelists to add their thoughts. But just some ideas I was kicking around really this morning, kind of just thinking about, well, what would I want people to really walk away with? First of all, we've given you an awesome exercise. Kudos to Amy for sharing this, to giving her time to us as a speaker, an author, and a trainer. This is valuable content that she's given to you, so do connect with her. This is a great exercise that she could help your team with. She does this for a living, so I think just honoring that and continuing this great work. Y'all have the PDF. Yeah, share this with a team of people. Do it with your work team. Just do it independently. Get better at it, just like Amy's doing. She's reflecting on it often. I reflect on this monthly, and I always can get better. I always have a gap. So it's a journey. 2, get intentional. I think you've heard that word a lot today. The learning part. So especially in the month of June, I got a lot of requests for what book should I read about racism, what podcast. Great start, but the journey continues. Okay, so there's tons of content out there. Be intentional about it. Small dose it. Break it into some pieces and parts. Whatever you're curious about. And maybe the networking like a champ exercise kind of illuminated maybe a dimension of diversity you can get better at. Learn about it. Get more intentional with it. Keep talking. My friends of color right now, that's their biggest ask of white people in the race conversation. don't stop talking about this. Please keep talking. And I'll add 5, talk to your kids about this. I am so proud that my daughter is 6 and goes to school in a very, very white community. I'm not proud of that part, but I am proud of the conversation that they had about racism recently. Her teacher defined racism. They had a conversation and they're 6. So if you think it's too young to start talking about it, I saw a great quote recently that said if Black children, brown children are old enough to experience racism, white children are old enough to learn about racism. And I thought that was a really well said comment. So even if you got 5, 6-year-olds, we actually have research that shows that's not too early to start the conversation. And of course, you don't have to explain all of the history of slavery and other things, but you can explain what racism is and how to be an anti-racist. So I know that's still something people are wrestling with, and there's lots of great tools out there. Share your diversity story. That came up in the chat a lot. You know, be empathetic, demonstrate that you've had your own experiences. Jeff's story about walking into the room of all women. I wasn't even there, but I feel like I was through his story. It's a brilliant one. Narav shared stories in past events about, his own experiences. Like you said, 18 years here. The more you can reveal vulnerability in yourself, the more it opens the door to other vulnerability. Participate in community events. Hey, we're virtual for now. There's tons of things still happening live in communities that are socially distanced. Get online, participate. Y'all mentioned Women in High Tech. For those of you who live in the indie community, I know I'm doing an ally event in November. We're gonna have virtually, there's tons of stuff still going on. Ask. There was so much activity in the chat. Ask your organization what they're doing. So this is where the real application needs to happen. We need to hold organizations accountable for this. Not what you were doing in June with your corporate statement and your donation, but what are you doing now? And keep asking about it. Otherwise, things will not change. And strive to be an ally. Allyship's in the eye of the beholder. You don't show up and say, I'm an ally, I'm here for you. That tends not to work so well. What does work well is when you recognize that somebody's different than you. They have different lived experiences than you, and you can listen to them and empathize with them. The biggest reason to do this is as doing this work, I've just become a fundamental better human by doing it. So that's why I advocate for this. Kind of back to your dial in on your why, how we shared our why for this earlier. Think about your why and how you can be there for people that are different. You'll just become better. I promise you. It doesn't backfire when you do it intentionally. Commit to being an anti-racist. It's not okay just to say I'm not racist. That's not good enough anymore. It never was, but it's not good enough now. So really digging into anti-racism, following, there's great newsletters, social media accounts online to keep that conversation going, books. And then the biggest thing, I'm not going to get political here, but be locally participating. A lot of people get overwhelmed nationally and statewide even. But there are things happening in your local communities with education and systemic barriers to race and ethnicity and gender challenges. Participate, know what's going on politically in your area, and show up and be intentional with who you choose to elect. Do your research locally. You can make a big difference in your local community. So those are just some ideas, top 10 list, if you will. Panelists, you want to add to that? Chats, what's coming in? Edit to your list.
The one I want to add is around your, if you happen to be a parent and if your school does not have a diversity council, we did. It literally was a group of 5 parents, and we got together on a call one day and said, here's what we want to address at our school. And we had a quick 30-minute Zoom meeting with the head of the school, and a diversity council has been started as a result.
That's awesome. I agree. That's a great, we started ours last year, and we had a parents' night just to talk about different dimensions of diversity openly in forum discussions. And it was, if parents feel equipped to have these conversations, they're much more likely to have them with our children. We've got to start with ourselves, but sometimes we don't have the tools. Great example, Angel. Other thoughts?
Hey, so this is Derek. I'll jump in, unless this is exclusive for panelists.
No, go for it.
Now, I just wanted to capitalize on what you guys are saying relative to school-age children. One thing to remember about children, they are curious, and always willing to learn. So relative to diversity in schools, look to partner with other schools that might create and foster diversity in your school. So there may be a sports league, chess league, or some other thing. Robotics is an awesome sort of bridge builder. So look to partner with other schools that may have the missing components that you guys are missing at your school to partner with.
That's great, Darius. Yeah, you don't have to do it alone. Find people that are already doing this work, leverage existing tools. Great. Yeah, who else was going to share?
Actually, Julie, is it okay if I plug my book real quick?
Oh, for sure.
So the activity that we did tonight came from this book. It's called Network Beyond Bias, and it's available on Amazon or on my website, leadatanelevel.com. And it's got all kinds of stuff related to the activity, building up to the activity, but also to kind of help you figure out where your biases start.
Yeah, great do-it-yourself guide, as well as Jeff's book. So be sure to.
Great book. And
someone linked to Women in High Tech. Jeff, you linked to it earlier. Some folks were mentioning that. Other thoughts? Rob, any closing thoughts on your side?
Nope, nothing. This was great conversation. Loved it.
Jeff, closing thoughts?
I love the interaction in the chat. That's fantastic. I've already connected with a lot of people through LinkedIn from this, so that's an awesome way to build the network. I would challenge everybody that if you're not used to, as Angel said at the beginning, if you're not used to walking into a room being the only, I challenge you to find rooms to walk in where you are the only.
Yeah. That's a really good closing thought, Jeff. Well said. Such wisdom there. Yeah, and that really demonstrates you're being an ally is when you show up in places where you're different. That's the whole point. That's where you're going to learn the most. Someone also linked to the Implicit Association test from Harvard. It's free. Rob, thank you. It's free. It takes 10 minutes. There's race, gender, and like 10 other categories. Really good exercise. You can take notes and compare with your work team too. So I know everyone's challenged with how to learn virtually, how to connect virtually. These are great exercises you can take and share with your work teams and have a Zoom call like this and talk through these exercises even when all this craziness is going on. So we hope you have some tangible things that you can do. Share ahas, thoughts in the chat as we're closing out. If anybody has any questions, we'll follow up with a note with our contact info and information on Amy and Jeff's books as well. And we just really appreciate everyone making the time and space for this conversation. It's really important, and every small, intentional act we make towards this makes a big difference. So thank you.
And a big thank you to Angel, Amy, and Nirav. Appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Julie.
Thank you.
Have some cake for us.
I'll try. Thanks, everybody.